Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good, and this is the final video covering the new Unearthed Arcana for the Psion class. In our first video, we looked at the Psion base class features, their spell list, as well as the new and revised spells that are being included with the Psion. That includes things like the Telekinetic Crush, which is a new one, as well as revisions to things like Tasha's Mind Whip and Ralatheme's Psychic Lance. And then we also spent the last couple of videos looking at the subclasses that were released with the Psion. We had the Metamorph and the Psi Warper in the first video, and then the Telepath and the Psychinetic in the second video. This is the final conclusion. We're going to take a look at the wild talents that were released with this Unearthed Arcana, and there's really no way for me to summarize them. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into it. This should be a relatively quick video compared to my last video. The first things first, what are the wild talents? It says that wild talents are a collection of feats that provide characters with a way to tap into their psionic powers. Backgrounds representing their connection to wild talents will be included with these feats in a future book if they become official. But in the meantime, a character who takes the noble or sage backgrounds can choose a wild talent feat in place of that background's origin feat, and any character can choose one of these feats when their class normally allows a feat choice. So they're saying that these feats are basically optional in place of the noble or sage background origin feats, or when you get a normal feat at level 4, 8, 12, 16, you can choose one of those feats as well, although they don't come with that ability score increase like many of the other general feats do. So we can see that first, wild talents are very similar to origin feats. They're going to be coming with backgrounds in the way that we've seen with like Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants, Book of Many Things, Dragonlance, Spelljammer had some as well that worked like that. But I'm really curious if the fact that they're saying that you can use the noble or sage background is a sign that they intend to allow other origin feats to be substituted in place of existing background origin feats, or if these are just a placeholder for the purpose of the playtest, since they're not giving us the backgrounds that will be associated with these wild talents. But basically, these origin feats are a way for non-Psion subclasses to sort of tap into psionic abilities, but of course the Psion themselves can also use them as well. It's unclear if these are supposed to be released in the same book as the Psion, but they're at least sort of connected in that way. So the first one that we're going to look at is called Atmokinesis. The first thing that we see here says it has a prerequisite that you can't have another wild talent feat. So similar to the Eberron marks, you can't have more than one of these features. First thing that you get is called Lightning Jolt. It says once per turn when you cast a spell or hit with an attack roll and deal bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, or psychic damage, you can change that damage type to lightning damage. Secondly, you have Psionic Talent. It says you know the Shocking Grasp cantrip. You always have Fog Cloud prepared, and then you can cast it once without a spell slot. You regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. You can also cast it using any spell slots you have at the appropriate level. Additionally, when you cast these spells, they require no verbal components or material components. If they do, you can choose Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma for the spellcasting ability when you choose the feat. And then when you reach level 3, you also get Gust of Wind always prepared, and you can cast it in the same way as described above. This framework is going to be shared among basically all the features that we're going to look at. All of them are basically going to give you a cantrip and some spells and have an additional effect as well. So I won't take the time to read it out every time that I go through it. But again, for this one, changing that damage type to lightning is pretty cool. Again, this kind of breaking the rules of psionics was what I was expecting from the Psykinetic subclass, but that's not quite what we got. I guess they didn't call it the Atmokinetic, it's the Psykinetic. It provides the Shocking Grasp cantrip, which is nice to, avoid opportunity attacks if you don't have another way to do that. The Fog Cloud spell is also a good equalizer in some situations. There's nothing really too crazy here, although I am wondering if these are also supposed to be released with the Psion subclass, so like if they're supposed to be coming out in the same book. Is the fact that in the Psion base class, the cantrips come online at 10 and 14. Is that because that they're expected to pick up one of these wild talent background feats, and that way that they would start with 4 cantrips? Because they get 2 from the base class, they get Mage Hand from one of their level 1 features, and then they would get like Shocking Grasp from this one. Is that the reason why they get cantrips at so late at 10 and 14, as opposed to 4 and 10 like every other class in the game? If that's true, if they're trying to balance around an optional feature, then I think that's kind of dumb, and they should just, again, use the same cantrip progression as every other spellcaster in the game. But then moving on to the next wild talent, we have Biokinesis. So this one says you can bend life energy. When a spell you cast restores hit points to a creature, you can roll 1d4. Add that amount to the hit points restored. You can do this a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. Additionally, the Psionic Talents gives us the Spare the Dying cantrip as well as Healing Word. And then once we get to level 3, we get the Arcane Vigor spell always prepared, and we can cast it the same ways. I will say that I think that the proficiency bonus per long rest limitation on the healing feels a bit limited. It is really such a small amount of healing. Like if you're using Atmokinesis to change your damage type to lightning because you happen to be facing a creature who's both resistant to bludgeoning, slashing, piercing, and psychic, so that you can deal full deal damage to them with a spell or an attack. If you even do that once, that is probably adding more damage to that spell or attack than the amount of healing that you would get from this feature being limited. So I feel like you could just take the limitations off the Bend Life Energy feature and then word it in such a way that you couldn't apply it to the Goodberry spell, because currently this does apply to the Goodberry spell. I feel like you could, again, remove the limit, make sure that it doesn't apply to Goodberry and similar effects. So it's basically just one time per spell. Other than that, being able to get Healing Word and even Arcane Vigor on classes that normally can't get those spells, I think is very useful. So this would be a fun one to pick up in those circumstances as well. The next one is called Clairsentience. This one says you have minor foreknowledge. When you take the search action, you can give yourself advantage on any ability check made as part of that action. Again, you can use this a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. Psionic Talent gives us the guidance cantrip to detect evil and good, and then at level 3 we get See Invisibility. Getting advantage on search checks is kind of whatever. Search checks aren't necessarily always super high impact, but I do think that the ability to get on-demand advantage for these kinds of checks is usually pretty rare, especially outside of like getting the help action from one of your friends. So having features like this maybe sort of steps on the help action, but I think at some tables as well, the help action can sometimes be overused. So I think features like this are kind of good to just prevent that sort of abuse. Again, I'll take the guidance cantrip whenever I can get it. Detect evil and good is fine, in certain circumstances. And then See Invisibility, again, it's one of those spells that you don't really need most of the time, but when it does come up, when you do have an invisible enemy, or you have like ethereal enemies in the ethereal plane, you can see them as well. When you do need it, you're definitely going to be wanted, and you're going to be glad that you have it. Moving then on to Cryokinesis. This one says once per turn, similar to Atmokinesis, when you deal bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, or psychic damage, you can change that to cold damage. Psionic Talent gives you Ray of Frost, Armor of Agathis, as well as Ice Knife. So this one's a little different in the fact that it gives us 2 level 1 spells instead of 1 level 1 spell and 1 level 2 spell at level 3. This is also a new source of Armor of Agathis, assuming that this goes in as is. There's only really like 1 or 2 ways to currently get this without actually taking levels in Warlock. So I will happily take this feature as is whenever I can get it, because I think that Armor of Agathis is such a fun spell to have. Even if it requires me to make a specific choice, like choosing a specific background to get it, I don't always mind doing that if that's what I'm wanting the build to do. Moving then on to the Empath wild talent. This one says you have an emotional sense. When you take the influence action, you can give yourself advantage on any ability check you make as part of that action. Again, proficiency bonus per long rest. The Psionic talent here gives you the Charm Person spell, as well as you get Calm Emotions at level 3. There are no cantrips that you get as part of this one. The influence action is arguably probably the most useful of the new sort of influence search or study actions. So being able to get on-demand advantage in a social setting is can be very impactful. Again, I do just generally like these features because I think, especially in social situations, it can be very common for players to be like, hey, can I have advantage for this reason, or can I have advantage for this reason? But now if you can have advantage, a few times per day on demand at your choice, that puts the onus on the player to say, hey, I have advantage on this one, and maybe they would even take the onus then to describe why they have advantage. Like what about it is like what about their intimidation is giving them that advantage, putting more work onto the players to come up with their own narrative rather than relying on the DM to come up with why they would have advantage on a certain roll. And again, Calm Emotions I think is another overlooked spell, but similar to See Invisibility, it's one of those utility spells that when you do need it, you're going to be glad that you have it because it suppresses the frightened and charmed conditions on affected creatures. So if you're going against like a dragon with a frightful presence or anything that can like mass charm or have dominates and other charm effects out, you can cast Calm Emotions on your party, and then those features can't affect them while that is up. So it certainly won't come up all the time, but again, when you do need it, it'll be right there, and it'll really kind of swing the combat in your favor. Moving on to the next talent, we have Flesh Morpher. This one says you have Flexible Flesh. When you make a Dexterity, Acrobatics, or Sleight of Hand check, you can add a bonus equal to your Intelligence modifier. You can use this a number of times equal to your Proficiency bonus per long rest. You get the Long Strider spell, as well as you get the Alter Self spell at level 3. Again, there's no cantrip here, which is interesting. Bonuses to Sleight of Hand can certainly be useful for like picking locks and doing other things that Sleight of Hand would never normally do. Bonuses to Acrobatics can help you more reliably get out of grapples and some restraints if you don't otherwise have like a teleport or an easier way to get out of that. Again, it does still require your action to break a grapple in 2024. I think Long Strider is always nice, and even if you only use it the one time that you have the free cast per day, again, having that extra 10 speed for an hour is very useful sometimes. And Alter Self is fine. It's basically a concentration version of Disguise Self, and you can change that disguise during that concentration. But it can also grant you a swim speed if necessary, like if you're in an aquatic adventure, or give you natural weapons if you're not the metamorph, but you want to get down and dirty in melee range for whatever reason. Again, I really do like these kind of background feats and things that come with like these very, very situational spells that people might often overlook but are still very useful in certain circumstances, because it means that you don't need to waste one of your own spell choices to pick them up when you're leveling up your class. You can just get them from this other thing, and then you can use them when they become relevant. The next one here is called Mind Whisperer. It says, as a magic action, you can choose one creature within 120 feet of yourself. You form a telepathic connection with that creature for 1 hour. And then as long as you're within 120 feet of each other, you can communicate with each other telepathically, but you must be communicating telepathically in a language the other one knows. And then you can do this once per short or long rest. The Psionic talent gives you the Mind Sliver cantrip as well as Dissonant Whispers, but you don't get any other leveled spell, like another level 1 or level 2 spell. You don't get another one. So the magic action to create an open line of communication between two players within 120 feet of each other is perfectly fine. Again, it's basically just a better version of the telepath connection from the Psion base class. The fact that this one comes back on a short rest is pretty cool too. You can use it pretty frequently. The Mind Sliver cantrip is a great one. It's one that I always like picking up when I can. Dissonant Whispers is potentially pretty strong as well. Again, no additional leveled spell. I know that other features didn't give a cantrip. I'm a little confused by the lack of a second leveled spell here. I don't know that a short rest walkie-talkie is strong enough that I would start excluding these other level 1 or 2 spells, but maybe Wizards of the Coast disagrees, although they also may just be running out of relevant level 1 or 2 spells, because again, there aren't that many spells, especially at level 2, that fit with every motif that they're trying to go for here. So the next one is called Psi Trickster. This one says you have Cunning Mind. When you make a Charisma, Deception, or Persuasion check, you gain a bonus equal to your intelligence modifier. Again, proficiency bonus per long rest. You also know the Minor Illusion cantrip. You also get Disguise Self, but again, there's no second leveled spell that we get here, so they're starting to exclude those. I think Deception and Persuasion, getting extra bonuses to them are some of the stronger skill choices that you can choose to get a bonus in. Although I'd say without great rolled stats, it's going to be difficult to have both a strong charisma bonus and a strong intelligence bonus. Usually people are going to focus on like strength and con or dex and con, and then one of their mental stats, and then semi-dump the other two. You know, with point buy or even standard arrays, it's difficult to get two good mental stats. So this might be just a +1 at best, or maybe you're already an intelligence-based class like a wizard or a Psion or whatever, and you want to your deception or persuasion to be better. So then you're getting the full bonus of your intelligence anyway. For the cantrip, I'm always a fan of Minor Illusion. It's probably one of my most common utility cantrips. Disguise Self, again, very situationally useful. I have used it to great effect before to basically turn a combat wildly in our favor, but other times it might not do much of anything at all. So that's very much your mileage may vary, but overall, perfectly fine wild talent here. Moving on, then we have the Psykineticist. This one has a Psi boost. As when you take the dash action, you can increase your speed by 10 feet until the start of your next turn, and then you can do this a number of times, proficiency bonus per long rest. The Psionic talent you get gives you the Telekinetic Fling cantrip, as well as the Thunder Wave spell, Always Prepared. Again, there's also no additional spell provided. I'm not sure how often the 10 extra feet will actually matter, unless like you're in a chase or something along those lines, but usually in a normal combat situation, that extra 10 feet isn't going to matter as much as just taking the dash action and having double movement anyway. But for sure, this would be decent on any class that can already dash as a bonus action, like your monks and your rogues. I think the Orc also gets a feature that lets them dash as a bonus action. I could be wrong. And this is also currently the only way that we've seen that a person who is not a Psion can get access to the Telekinetic Fling cantrip, so that's pretty cool. Thunder Wave is also a fine spell, no real complaints there, other than the fact that we just don't have this additional second leveled spell here. And then for our last wild talent, we have Pyrokinesis, similar to Atmokinesis and Cryokinesis. This one says, when you cast a spell or hit with an attack roll and deal bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, or psychic damage, you can change that damage to fire. You get the Produce Flame cantrip, the Burning Hands spell, as well as the Scorching Ray spell at level 3. So this is the fire version of those talents. Produce Flame, I think, is very cool in 2024. It's much more functional than it was previously, and it serves both a function of being basically a version of the light spell, acting as like a torch, and it deals damage sort of like a fire flower in Mario. Burning Hands is a fine spell. It's not always useful, but it's fine. And then Scorching Ray is just a really fun, blaster type spell, especially if you're upcasting it, and then have other ways to like add other damage riders to it. Again, no real complaints here. So for my initial impressions of the wild talents, again, I'll always be happy to see expanded background and origin feat options, especially compared to how limited the player's handbook background options are and the feats that come with them, and how it's just like 1 feat per background. I mentioned the backgrounds that came in the book community things a few videos ago and how good those were, where it's like you had one of 3 feats you could choose from, like origin feat type feats, and I thought that was such a better way to go about it. I'm really surprised that they didn't do something like that in the player's handbook. If they just did did that, I probably would have been much more happy about the backgrounds, but as they are, I just think, again, they're just so limiting. I find every time I make a build, I'm just like one or two options that are okay. There's nothing that I'm usually happy with. Then, as I mentioned at the beginning of this one, the Atmo, Cryo, and sort of Pyrokinesis wild talents are what I would have expected a Psion subclass to be built around, sort of, again, breaking those rules of psionics. The ability to change your damage type will probably matter more so for just martial subclasses who don't otherwise have a way to change their damage type. Like the monk has a way to change their damage to like force or something like that. But like the fighter, I don't believe has a way to change their damage type from bludgeoning, slashing, or piercing, but if they took one of these talents, then they could. I do think that the lack of a second leveled spell on some of these talents feels a little bit undeserved. You know, I don't think that everything needs a cantrip, although I do love cantrips. I love getting cantrips everywhere I can. I just don't always think that the first feature that you get on these talents is so strong that it is deserving of removing one of the additional spells you would get from the second feature. And then finally, again, I'm really hoping that the fact that they suggested to apply these to the noble or sage backgrounds is a sign that they plan on giving that sort of optional rule in the future, that, you know, origin feats that they release later on can be applied to certain backgrounds in the player's handbook. I'm just really happy to look for any possible way to make the backgrounds in the player's handbook feel better than they are. That is all the wild talents. Those are my opinions on them. Again, there's nothing too crazy in here. I just wanted to put this in their own video because it is unclear if these are supposed to be released in the same book as the Psion. They are not requirements for the Psion, so I didn't want to put them in the same video as the Psion's base class or subclasses. Which one of these is your favorite? Which one of these maybe would you want to have on one of your existing characters already? Like, does it fit something that you've already been playing? You know, do you think that some of these features not having a second leveled spell is maybe a little undeserved, or do you think it's fine the way it is? Let me know all that and more down in the comments down below. And again, while you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you are a new or returning viewer to this channel and you like what you saw here and you want to see more from me, please consider hitting that subscribe button and support the channel. I release videos every Wednesday and Sunday, so you always have something to look forward to. We'll be getting back to business as usual after this video, so as always, I appreciate your time and I'll see you in the next one.